the next helper that we're going to look at is going to be one that's going to assist with something that I guarantee, I guarantee it, I promise you, you have used a for loop for this in the past. The next helper we're going to look at is the find helper. The find helper's purpose is to search through an array and look for a particular element in the array. As soon as a record is found with the given criteria, the helper will return that record. So again, as usual, let's start off with a for loop example and then refactor it over to use this find helper. So I'm going to imagine that I have an array of objects where each object represents a very particular user. So perhaps I've got a user with the name of Jill and a user with the name of Alex and Bill as well. So 3 names in here, 3 different users. So I want to imagine for a second that I want to walk through this array and find the user with the name Alex. So of course we know it's index 2 right here, but I want to actually walk through the array and go through a for loop and try to find it dynamically. And I want to assign the result to a variable of user. So by default, we will just declare the variable user outside the for loop, and then inside the for loop, we will find this very particular user. So we'll walk through the array with the usual boilerplate. And then once we're inside the array, if users at I.name is equal to Alex, then user at users I gets assigned like so, and then we can just say, show me the user, and sure enough, it's Alex. So we walked through each element in the array until we found a user with this very particular name, and once we found it, we assigned it to the user variable, which we declared outside the loop, and then afterwards we're able to log it and see, oh, okay, of course, the name is Alex. One thing I want to point out here is that with this current implementation of the loop, even though Alex is the second record on here, so the second element, we're still walking through the entire length of the loop, or excuse me, the array. So we are not breaking out of the loop early when we find the user that we're looking for. To fix that, I might put in a break statement in here. And so a break statement would say, okay, once we find this particular user, we don't need to keep walking through the loop. Just stop right here. It would be a waste of time to continue looking through the rest of the array. So again, obviously I can make the case that using the find helper is going to be a better approach than using the for loop here. So let's take a look at a diagram that's going to help us figure out exactly how the find helper is working. So here is a diagram that's illustrating how we're going to use the find helper. And the diagram itself probably looks a lot like the filter helper that we used just previously. So with the find helper, we walk through every element in the array, so Jill, Bill, and Alex. I think the example that I have, I swapped the names here with Bill and Alex, but you get the idea. For each element in the array, we pass it into an iterator function, and that iterator function must return a truthy or a falsy value. The find helper will keep calling elements with the iterator function until the iterator function eventually returns true. Once it returns true, the find helper immediately exits its iteration, returning the record that it found. So in this case, Alex, if we were looking for Alex. So let's try this out with a little bit of a refactor here. I'm going to put some new lines down like so, and then we're going to walk through our list of users. So I'm going to say users.find. I'm going to pass in our iterator function. The iterator function will be called with an individual user, and I want to find a user with a name equal to Alex, like so. And so we basically, we got this one right here. I'm going to delete the for loop implementation for right now, just because it's kind of giving us a little bit too many logs there. So now a little bit more clear. We walk through the list of users until we find the user with the name of Alex. Again, do not forget to put the return statement here. If we don't return, we end up with nothing at all, because the inner function here, the iterator, will be returning undefined for every run through, and so the find helper is going to think, oh, they must not be finding anything at all. So don't forget to put in the return statement. Just like with the filter function as well, this is another instance where you do not need to do something like username, like so, and then return true. So this would be a kind of a overzealous approach right here is what I might say. You don't need to put in an if statement just so you can return true. The Boolean comparator right here, this triple equals, will return a Boolean of true or false, and so you can just return that comparison by itself. Cool. So again, just as before, I'm going to make the case that this is much more straightforward than using the for loop implementation. With a for loop, we had a ton of extra boilerplate in there just to make a simple comparison, and then we also had to remember that case in which, hey, do we find this user? If so, then I need to break out of the for loop early. Otherwise, I'm going to keep crawling through the array forever and ever. Now, there is one small drawback to this approach right here using find. Or I shouldn't say approach, but I more want to say that this is something I want to point out in particular. The find helper will iterate through the array until it finds the first element that returns true from the iterator function. And the result of that is that if I have two elements in the array that return true, only the first one is going to be returned by the find helper. And so let's say if I added on an ID of like 4, you can see that this ID 4, clearly this record right here, even though this record would also satisfy the logic that we put in here. And so if I put in a name like Alexi, all of a sudden, okay, yeah, now it's going down to the second one because the second record no longer actually matches up with the filter criteria right here, or the find criteria, excuse me. All right, now that we've looked at or gotten a little introduction on the find helper, let's continue in the next section and look at a little bit more complex example. I'll see you there.